not working. Oh, okay, working. Sorry, these microphones are kind of disturbing. You realize that they do work only after after a while. So welcome to the last session of this conference. I already told my panelists that I know it's hard to be at the last session, but it's going to be a good session. A very interesting session about manors and castles as places of memory. So welcome to this last session. We have three speakers on site and a commentator online. So welcome to this session, and you will each have 20 minutes to bring us back to the material heritage, but also to make some connections of material and intangible heritage, and I believe you can do it perfectly. So you'll start with Filip Binder from the Czech Academy of Sciences, who will speak about the castles of the 19th century as sites of memory of the aristocracy based in the Czech lands. And I will read the bio of Filip. So Filip is a member of the Department of Modern Cultural and Social History of the Czech Academy of Sciences. He studied history and archival sciences at the Faculty of Arts of Charles University in Prague, where he also finished his PhD studies in the field of Czech history this year. Congratulations. His PhD thesis was dealing with the relationship of the aristocracy settled down in the Czech lands to Romanticism, using the example of their building activities and landscaping, and with the question what owners' intentions these projects show and whether their conceptions, when compared to each other, were always the same. So looking forward to hear about that. In his interdisciplinary research, he mainly focuses on the lifestyle of nobility in the 18th and 19th century and the residences and landscaping. He also published a monograph on the foreign journeys of the aristocracy from the Czech lands in the late 18th and early 19th century, and is one of the co-authors of two other books dealing with the topic of nobility and their residences and landscaping. Filip, the floor is yours.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you for many thanks to the organizers of this event for having the opportunity to introduce my paper to you. I was concerning. I was dealing in the past months with country houses that was rebuilt in the 19th century, country houses of the Bohemian nobility. And I would like to focus now on those residences as sites of memory. So 19th century was the era of Romanticism and historicism, which marked an increased interest among the nobility in the past, including in the history of their own families. So therefore, as I already mentioned, my paper will focus on those buildings, sites of memory, exploring how much space the owners devoted to presenting family memory within them, and trying to answer if the aristocrats who were renovating their country residences used for similar purposes conceived their projects in the same way as their peers. I would like to demonstrate by using several examples which concern projects or castles shown at this plan or map of the Czech Republic, so that you have an idea. I would like to demonstrate that their approaches to family memory varied. Maybe a marginal comment, I will be referring to the buildings simply as castles, although they could be called chateaux, for example, or in Polish, you would call them palaces. I would also like to mention very briefly that the sources on the basis of which it's possible to focus on the topic include, for example, old inventories, photographs, pictures, paintings of the castles or their interiors, project documentation, but of course researchers have to focus on iconographic decoration of particular rooms as well. It's necessary, however, to take into account that a lot of things changed, so it can be tricky. So that's why it's also important to deal also with the sources I mentioned now. I also found working with ego documents useful, in which you can get insight not only into mental world of the nobleman or aristocrats, but sometimes even find mentions on their projects and how and why they wanted to conceive them, why they decided to choose the particular styles, and if there was or if there is any symbolism hidden in it. So if I mentioned the question of style and symbolism, I should also add that the 19th century castles were in many cases influenced by Great Britain, by British architecture, since Great Britain influenced the European culture a lot. Britain was the first country where nobles began to adjust their residences in taste of the so-called Gothic revival. And since British influences were considered highly fashionable in Central Europe in the 19th century, the aristocrats based there began to draw inspiration from Britain. Here some famous examples of Gothic revival from Britain, and the aristocrats based in the Czech lands started to choose, for example, Gothic revival for their projects as well. Now we can have a look at the most famous projects carried out around the mid-19th century that include castles like Hluboká, Lednice, or, for example, Hrádek u Nechanic. Some researchers viewed these projects not only as a reflection of the popularity of Britain among the aristocracy, but also saw the owner's choice of New Gothic for this project in a symbolic way as a response to key challenges that the aristocracy had to face, for instance, the loss of political power and most privileges. In the past, and sometimes even now, these projects were or have been seen as a political manifestation, demonstration of the power of the aristocracy, which by means of building replicas of old castles was set to emphasize a long tradition or to remind itself of the period of its greatest glory. And that's why we can ask whether these buildings were intended as places for presenting family memory of aristocracy in the first place. An example of a building where great attention was paid to the presentation of memory is Sechrov in North Bohemia, which was purchased by the French origin House of Rohan, some of whose members left France after the outbreak of the French Revolution. Before the mid-19th century, Prince Camille began renovating the castle in historicizing styles. The main means of presenting family memory here were portraits, statues, and busts. Camille devoted almost the entire castle to the presentation of family memory, not only the state rooms, intending to commemorate an extraordinarily large number of his ancestors by means of showing their portraits. And we are talking here about at least several dozen members of the family. So here are some of the portraits that are shown in the castle also today. And Kamil also ordered fictional portraits of his ancestors from the medieval period to be painted as well, which you can see on this slide. The key figure of the celebration was Duke Henry II, a commander during the 30 Years' War and cousin of French King Henry IV. The family's connection to the French kings and the fact that Rohan history was linked to France for many centuries was emphasized not only through portraits of the Bourbons in the castle, but also through the use of Bourbon lilies on the wallpaper in some rooms. And through the coats of arms of historical French territories. Some factors suggest that this project was intended to present family memory not only to the aristocratic society of the Austrian Empire into which the Rohans had to integrate, but also to remind Kamil and the future generations of the family of their roots. One could therefore say that Kamil sought to so to say, almost create a monument to the Rohans. So that's the approach number one. While Kamil sought to conceive Sychrov, his only significant country residence, as a family memorial, other aristocrats sought to create memorials of different kind. For example, in the case of Prince Vincent Karl of Auersperg, some researchers have emphasized his interest in chivalry, which led him to start adjusting Žleby Castle in central Bohemia in the 1840s and to furnish the rooms with a large collection of weapon and armor. Moreover, Vincent and his wife organized masquerade balls with participants often dressed as historical figures there, and he and his relatives were also portrayed in this manner, as you can see here on these pictures or paintings. However, when a researcher examines old inventories and literature, they find out that these references to specific family members are exceptions and concerned Vincent himself and the living members of his family. But there were very few references to the family's past. For example, there's the so-called 30 Years' War chamber in the castle, decorated with weapons referring to this conflict. But 30 Years' War was chosen not because it had a special connection to the Auersperg's family's history, but because it's said to be Auersperg's favorite period of history. Several staterooms at the castle, in the castle, were named knights, such as the Knights Hall, Knights Chamber, and Knights Gallery, as you can see here. This indicates that Vincent conceived his project as a monument to chivalry, but not, as Kamil, for example, as a monument to the house to which he belonged. So it means that the memory that was presented here in the first place is the memory of the Middle Ages and early modern period, this time of chivalry. Let us focus now on Franz Ernst of Harrach, who decided in the 1830s to build Hradec u Nechanic as a new castle. Harrach dedicated the Knight's Hall to the memory of his family history. So here again look at the castle's exterior. But regarding the interiors, we can see here the Knight's Hall, which was dedicated to the memory of his family, where he displayed portraits of significant members of the family, as well as prominent aristocrats related to the Harrachs. However, most of the remaining rooms were furnished with new antique-looking and antique items to evoke the atmosphere of an ancient residence, but those rooms show Harrach as a collector, not as an aristocrat trying to build a medieval castle as a monument to House of Harrach, since the attention paid to presenting its history was very, very tiny. So if I have tried to show that the attention paid to memory differed within castles used as representative country residences, I will attempt now to demonstrate the same with those castles that were not used as residences for their owners in the first place. In the 19th century, some castles were converted into museums accessible to the public. The first such museum in the Czech lands was Friedland, with a museum opened by the family Klamgalas in 1801. The first 3 rooms, as published guides confirm, were dedicated to the members of houses that owned Friedland. Published guides made the readers familiar with the portrait individuals and their fates. A large space was devoted to Wallenstein or Wallenstein as the most famous holder of the estate, to whom, along with his traitor Matthias Count Gallas, an entire room was dedicated. So you can see the room or the current condition, let's say, in this picture or slide. While no entire room was reserved for members of the Klamgalas family, so for the founders of the museum. In the rest of the exhibition, visitors could view paintings and a collection of weapons. And if we ask what the reason was why the members of the Klamgalas family decided to open their castle for public, the main reason does not seem their desire to learn more about the history of their family. But Friedland was intended as a trip destination for spa guests being treated in the Klamgalas spa Liebwerda, close to Friedland. So that's one of the main reasons, I would say. And another one was Friedland was known partly thanks to Friedrich Schiller's place as a place associated with Wallenstein, the Duke of Friedland, and that is why also the published guides paid more attention to Wallenstein than to particular members of the House of Klamgalas. Another castle museum I would like to talk about is Rosenberg in South Bohemia, which was rebuilt around 1850 by Count Georg II Bucquoy or Bucquoy. the founder of the museum. Georg conceived his museum not only as a museum preserving the memory of his family, unlike Kamil at Sichrov, but also of the entire place, as the rooms in Rosenberg also referred to previous owners, like in Friedland. However, compared to Friedland, more attention was paid to the Bukua family itself, with several rooms dedicated to them. Compared to Friedland, other differences can also be observed, as the Klamgalas tried to display portraits of all the owners whose portraits were preserved, while Georg selected only a few of the most famous and important members to introduce. In the late 19th and early 20th century, the number of castle museums in the Czech lands and the entire empire increased. So here, sorry, I forgot to look at the interiors of Rosenberg. But back to the castle museums, because here you can see Bohusov Castle, another castle that was rebuilt in the 19th century, at the very end of the 19th century, by Archduke Eugen, Grand Master of the Teutonic Order. So that was also one of the museum, but close to Bohusov, there's Sternberg Castle, where a museum was also founded by Johann II of Liechtenstein, collector of arts, who placed part of his extensive collections there, mainly paintings, weapons, and so on. However, it seems that the presentation of the family memory of the Liechtensteins was rather relegated to the background in case of Sternberg, since it was the valuable collections that were the main things presented here. So if we return to possible symbolical meanings of castles that were also used for representation purposes, it cannot be automatically said that the most important intention of the owners was the musealization of their family history. The attention that individual aristocrats paid to family memory was quite different, and the ways in which it was presented varied from case to case. While sometimes such a castle was intended to be a celebration of the family and its famous personalities, sometimes family memory was presented in a very marginal and vague way. The memory of specific ancestors of the family was sometimes not even supposed to be the main thing for those families that made their castles into museums. So if you ask if there is a key according to which you can find a connection between a nobleman or aristocrat and the character of his projects, sometimes we do not find a generally valid characteristic, because in addition to the more objectively given factors, it is necessarily to take into account the foundation of the builder himself, his interests and personality. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much also for the perfect time discipline. Now we are proceeding to our second speaker, who is Luděk Němec, and he's in the final stage of his master's degree in history at the University of Vienna. His research mainly focuses on the history of the nobility of the Habsburg monarchy from the 19th century to the present, as well as on the Czech-German relations and the multi-ethnic areas of the Bohemian lands. Currently, he's completing his master thesis titled Therese Schwarzenberg, Das Leben einer adeligen Frau zwischen Monarchie, Republik und Diktatur. In 2021, he published a monograph which describes the complex development of the Czech-German relations in Bohemia during the 20th century, using one example of a South Bohemian village. And he has also worked for several years as a guide and seasonal collaborator at the Hluboká State Castle, which is meaningful for today's paper, I believe, which is entitled The Pearl of South Bohemia, Hluboká castle between aristocratic memory, cultural symbol, and tourist attraction. The floor is yours.
How does it work with the
I have no idea. It should appear in a minute, I think. Maybe you can start.
Okay.
Solving the problem.
So thank you very much, and also thank you for accepting my paper. I'm glad to have the possibility to present it here in Warsaw. In my paper, I will focus on one particular castle in the Czech Republic, the Hluboká castle, in the region of South Bohemia, and its history throughout the turbulent 20th century, during which the castle underwent 2 expropriations and several regime changes. Despite these upheavals, it remained largely intact. It was used both as a residence for elites, including not only the noble elites and families, but also a Nazi and communist elites, and at the same time as a tourist attraction, though its interpretation changed over time. The objective of this paper is to analyze the different interpretations of and uses of Hluboká castle, highlighting both continuities and discontinuities, and elucidating how the castle emerged as a site of aristocratic memory, transformed into a tourist attraction, and it became a cultural symbol of the region. The paper is organized chronologically according to historical turning points, with each chapter addressing several analytical categories, as specifically the castle's function as a representative residence, its role as a tourist destination, the transformation of its interior, and the interpretation of the interior during tours since the 1920s. On the next slide, I think we can see the location of Hluboká castle once more, because it was already shown by my colleague Filip in the previous paper. Inspired by the Gothic revival trends during the Romantic period, Johann Adolf II, Prince of Schwarzenberg, and his wife Eleonore, Princess of Liechtenstein, decided to rebuild the then Baroque castle of Hluboká into a neo-Gothic representative seat, symbolizing the status and history of the wealthiest noble family in Bohemia and one of the most prominent in the Habsburg monarchy. Following the radical historicist renovation carried out between 1840 and 1871, Hluboká became commonly known as the Pearl of South Bohemia, referring to the striking contrast between the castle's bright white facade and the surrounding forests, as well as the wealth demonstrated through its appearance and furnishings in the interior. The Schwarzenberg family established a castle that is both historically evocative and aligned with the modern standards of aristocratic living, while also serving as a site of aristocratic memory, housing the most valuable art objects from their collections and manifesting their wealth and influence both among their social group and across the whole society. Despite the financial, technical, and time-intensive demands of the renovation, the castle did not become a permanent residence. The Schwarzenbergs stayed there regularly only in the autumn, with the hunting season serving as the highlight of their stay. On these occasions, they used the castle for representation for 30 to 50 guests from the Habsburg nobility and ruling dynasties. But beginning in the 1870s, also school groups, associations, and the broader public expressed interest in visiting the castle, which was permitted by the Schwarzenberg administration on an individual request basis when the family was absent. But it was not until the early 1920s that regular tourism service was established there. A necessary precondition was the change in the status of the nobility, which arose following the dissolution of Austria-Hungary at the end of the First World War. In the newly formed Czechoslovak Republic, the nobility was officially abolished in December 1918, and shortly thereafter, a land reform was implemented, reducing the Schwarzenberg estates in Bohemia to 1/3 of their original extent. Amid the post-war revolutionary atmosphere, the municipal office in Hluboká even issued a pamphlet proposing the expropriation of the estate and the use of the castle as either a residence of the new president, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, or as an art gallery. Although this proposal was not enacted, negotiations were initiated with the Ministry of Education and National Enlightenment to secure broader public access to the castle. And the result was the issuance of the first official visitor regulations in July 1922, which guaranteed public access to 4 Schwarzenberg castles, including Hluboká. It was one of the most extensive steps in making cultural heritage accessible for the public in the Czech lands during the interwar period. A guided tour route was established, including the Princess Eleonore's apartment, the representation rooms, and the armory. The tours were administered by castle staff, and as indicated in the official guide published in 1934, particular emphasis was placed on the history of the Schwarzenberg family and the significant achievement of its members, with a hint of their glorification, alongside a detailed description of all accessible rooms. The number of visitors to the castle varied significantly, climbing from over 8,000 people in 1924 to around 20,000 throughout the 1930s. In 1928, an aerial photograph of Hluboká was even selected as a motif for a postage stamp in an edition marking the 10th anniversary of the founding of Czechoslovakia. Thus, the seat of members of a social group that had been stripped of its privileged status in the same state appeared as a perforated engraving alongside a portrait of the President Masaryk and significant landmarks from across the country, placing Hluboká on their level and perceive it not only as an aristocratic residence, but also as a symbol of the region of South Bohemia. In autumn 1939, Adolf Schwarzenberg, the owner of the family estates, left Bohemia due to his anti-Nazi stance and later emigrated to the United States. In August 1940, his property in Europe was expropriated by Nazi Germany, which thereby acquired extensive forest, agricultural, and industrial assets, as well as valuable art collections and residences. The imposed Nazi administration did not disrupt the existing system beyond the change in ownership. The castle continued to be managed in the same spirit by the same staff. Although the tourism was numerically subdued, it remained around 10,000 visitors per year. However, it is not known in what narrative the visitors were informed about the history of the castle and the Schwarzenberg family. At the same time, the castle was being used to receive prominent guests, not from the nobility, but high-ranking officials of the Third Reich. The former Schwarzenberg estate was placed under the control of August Eigruber, governor of Upper Austria and Gauleiter of the Reichsgau Oberdonau, who reserved one of the aristocratic suites for himself. In October 1941, following the Schwarzenberg tradition, he organized Hans at Hluboká, attended by Reinhard Heydrich, who had recently become the deputy protector of Bohemia and Moravia. And Eigruber also continued to use the castle for similar, mostly informal gatherings with party colleagues until March 1945. According to a plan devised in April of that year, Hluboká was intended to serve as a refuge for the so-called protectorate government and the Minister of State for Bohemia and Moravia, Karl Hermann Frank, but this plan was never realized due to the end of the war. A similar pattern as during the Nazi era was repeated after the Second World War. The castle was not returned to the Schwarzenberg family, but it was instead placed under national administration, and in 1947 it was expropriated for the second time by a special law, the Lex Schwarzenberg, which was specifically enacted for the wealthiest Bohemian landowner, Adolf Schwarzenberg. After the liberation in May 1945, Hluboká became an attraction for soldiers of both the Soviet and American armies, as well as a destination for official delegations, such as those of Generals Ernest Harmon and George Patton, as you can see in the picture, in September 1945. Particularly at the turn of the 1940s and 50s, members of the Czechoslovak government, high-ranking state and party officials and delegations, primarily from Eastern Bloc countries, visited Hluboká and used it for banquets and overnight stays in the aristocratic apartments. Despite its role in representing communist Czechoslovakia, the interior remained largely untouched, maintaining its historical character designed to represent the Schwarzenberg family. In the early post-war years, the organization managing Hluboká changed several times. In 1951, it came under the administration of the National Cultural Commission, whose task was to care for confiscated castles and make them accessible to the public. In this regard, it was possible to build on the already established practice of tours, with visitor numbers soaring massively in the post-war years from just under 23,000 in 1946 to more than 150,000 in 1952. In communist Czechoslovakia, the increased leisure time limited opportunities for foreign travel, and the state-initiated democratization of culture led more and more people to visit domestic castles. The South Bohemian region, combining a high density of castles and natural landmarks, became a popular tourist destination, with Hluboká as an integral and very important part of it. From the perspective of the ruling Communist Party, the aspect of large-scale visits to former aristocratic residences in a state that regarded the nobility as a class enemy from the very start was problematic. Very problematic. There are attempts to supplement guided tours with ideological inserts, which, however, met with little interest from the audience. In the case of Hluboká, the continuity of the staff proved problematic in this regard as well, because until 1958, the castle's manager was Emil Borčický, who had worked there since 1936 and had experienced the Schwarzenberg, Nazi and Czechoslovak administrations. He and his colleagues were repeatedly the target of complaints from politically motivated visitors due to their sentimentality, as they would nostalgically recall the Schwarzenberg family during the tours. The changing to the tour guide syllabus aimed to achieve several objectives, primarily to reduce narrative concerning the aristocratic owners, prevent any glorification, and reinterpret the historicist reconstruction as the whim of wealthy nobility, contrasting it with conditions of the working class. The presence of art collections of foreign origin and paintings by foreign artists was also problematic, leading to an emphasis on works by domestic artists and craftsmen. In 1961, the castle's visitor numbers reached a peak of nearly 340,000 people. Once again, it was only 23,000 just 15 years before. Such a large influx of people following the same route, which had been open since 1922, was overwhelming in terms of both the capacity of the rooms and the ability of the staff to manage the crowds. Mass tourism and the phenomenon of Hluboká even became the subject of a documentary film in 1963 titled Neděle na Hluboké, Sunday in Hluboká. The film captures a day in the town which is disrupted by the arrival of numerous tour buses filled with tourists who explore the castle, purchase souvenirs, and then depart in the evening. And the segments dedicated to the castle tour carry a subtle irony, as brief sequences are highlighting the differences in the narrative given by different guides. However, the castle was connected to film in another way as well. The very first Czechoslovak feature-length fairy tale, Pyšná princezna, the Proud Princess, from 1952, used Hluboká as a backdrop, thereby starting another tradition that continues to this day and contributes to its popularity, the use of the castle as a film set. In the 1960s, the first ideologically motivated interventions in the castle's interior took place, although they were always discussed as artistic and historical considerations. One of the initial parts of the tour, consisting of 4 rooms from the former suite of Princess Eleonore, was altered by removing some of the furniture so that they no longer resembled private quarters. The depersonalized suite was transformed into exhibition spaces organized by the date and type of the displayed art objects. In response to the 14th Congress of the Communist Party in 1971, state castles were to be supplemented with introductory ideological exhibition that would contextualize the aristocratic interiors by addressing class struggle. Consequently, at Hluboká, the entrance areas were stripped of certain art pieces that heritage conservation workers deemed in poor taste, and the ideological exhibition was ultimately placed at the end of the tour, where the original installation of historical weapons, which you can see on the left side, was dismantled to make space for exhibition about the communist movement in the region, which you can see on the right side of the slide. The tour guide script was also ideologically revised. Thanks to the new interventions, it was emphasized that the castle is not only preserved as an aristocratic residence, but also reflects the path that Czechoslovakia embarked on after 1945, namely the building of socialism. The original furnishings of the castle were labeled as in poor taste, and the commentary on the historical interior included a remark noting that modern socialistic housing estates could be seen through the windows. The Schwarzenberg family receded into the background of the narrative, yet remained present through the portraits on the walls. The tradition of using the castle to accommodate the communist elite continued. For example, on the 40th anniversary of the founding of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia in 1961, the Czechoslovak president Antonín Novotný and the chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union, Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev, spent the night in the castle. In this regard, however, certain elements of democratization in the representative use of Hluboká can be observed too, allowing, for example, the broader wedding ceremonies within the castle, and distinguished workers were also from the region were also rewarded and honored in its rooms. The fall of the communist regime did not allow the restitution of the castle to the Schwarzenberg family, but it did lead to the removal of ideological overlays in the interior and the narrative presented to visitors. Alterations made to the exhibitions during 1960s and 70s were largely eliminated, and the interiors were restored to their original state based on historical inventories. Between 2005 and 2017, 3 additional routes were opened to the public, showcasing the kitchen, the private apartments, and the guest rooms. And the interpretation of these spaces emphasizes the 19th and early 20th century, particularly the historicist renovation, the Schwarzenberg family, and their heritage. Conversely to its use for the state representation purposes had been almost entirely diminished, with the exception of the 2009 meeting of European Union foreign ministers, which you can see on the picture on the right side, which was symbolically convened here by Karel Schwarzenberg, the then Czech Minister of Foreign Affairs, and also a descendant of the last aristocratic owners of the castle. To conclude, the Schwarzenberg family transformed Hluboká into a representative castle, which subsequently served as a residence for not only the noble elite, but also the Nazi and communist elites. Despite the nearby political center of the region, the city of České Budějovice, possessing its own representative spaces, Hluboká remained a symbolic, sometimes official, sometimes unofficial place of power for both totalitarian regimes of the 20th century, and to some extent also for the democratic political representation. This occurred not in spite of the fact that it was an aristocratic residence before, but precisely because of it. The castle's interior, which had undergone only minor changes, played a key role. Since its reconstruction, the castle has also attracted public interest, and since the 1920s it has been open to visitors through guided tours, a tradition that continues to this day. Over the past century, it has become one of the most visited tourist destinations in the Czech Republic. However, the interpretation of the castle's interiors varied depending on political circumstances, often being a subject of ideological influence, with tours serving as a tool for both education and indoctrination of visitors. The communist regime left its marks on the interiors, infusing them with ideological elements, but despite 2 expropriations and numerous seizures during the 20th century, Hluboká has largely retained the appearance it was given by the aristocracy in the 19th and early 20th century. Thanks to its wealth of concentrated collections, public interest, and reflection in popular culture, it has become a cultural symbol of southern Bohemia. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. And now we are proceeding to our last speaker. István Kollai is a Marie Curie Fellow at the Institute of Social Anthropology at Comenius University Bratislava, and his research topic addresses the embeddedness of castles, chateaus, and mansions in the contemporary Slovak cultural landscape and its effect on the collective consciousness of the local communities. István has degrees in economy and in history, and the academic experience engaged him in writing and editing publications in Slovak, Hungarian, and English, primarily about Central European interethnic issues, while professional experience engaged him in cultural diplomacy for the Hungarian Institute in Bratislava, where he was appointed as the director of the institute for 5 years until 2015. From 2017, as an assistant professor at the Corvinus University, he provided lectures on cultural economy and human geography of Central and Eastern Europe. And today we will hear a paper entitled Genius Loci around castles in Slovakia, built heritage of feudal past in the cultural landscape and in the social mindscape. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you for your attention even in this last hours of the 3-day conference. As you could hear, I try to do research about the Slovakian built heritage from a bit social anthropological perspective, trying to focus on the process, how these chateau and castles are embedded into not just in the landscape, but in the so-called mindscape of the people. So how it has an interaction with the way of thinking. These are just very brief theoretical context or frame of the research, showing that there is a kind of primary concept of the landscape experience, as the literature likes to use this expression, the phrase, stressing that landscape is not something which is just built up or consisted of objects, but it is built in our mind with the help or through the activities of agents or actors, individual actors who shape these image in our mind about the landscape, and with texts, so books and stories, storytelling and historical narratives which we have about the landscape. So it could be the kind of primary concept which I would like to challenge in just a very small point, but I think it could be interesting, or I think it's important, at least in Slovakia, that the question is whether we could maybe speak about not just the landscape experience, but a kind of landscape expectation in the mind of the people, which means that thanks to the living conditions of the people, they have a kind of sensitivity towards some historical stories. Meanwhile, they are disregard or overlook some other stories. It could be called as landscape expectation in the mind of the people. And these kind of expectations, like a kind of demand on the market of the commercialization of the heritage, it can have an effect on the agents and actors' activities. What does it mean in particular examples? I hope that I can explain it to you. It's just a small, anyway important, but I don't want to sacrifice too much time now about it. List about these problematics around the naming and the terminology around these castles and chateaus, because the most proper would be to speak about chateau in the case of Slovakia, because my research focuses on this village, in this feudal, representative feudal buildings without any kind of aim of fortification or defending the village or the building. So it wasn't that built for defending themselves. It was just about represent the castle owners and to function as a kind of center of the estate. But now, just for simplicity, I also will call them as castles or village castles, but I don't focus on these fortified ruins built on the top of the hills. I made maybe you cannot see the numbers, but the colors and the shades could be telling for you that it is the distribution of the chateau in Slovakia. However, according to the Slovakia Monument Boards, there are 434 chateau, castiel in Slovakia, mostly located in villages. But for instance, in some books which are just about written about this topic, they speak about 700 or chateau, or some books which were issued after the Second World War, before the very strong ruination of these buildings. They write about and they list 1,200 buildings. So there could be a debate about the categories and numbers. What is a castle and a chateau, and which buildings can fall under these categories? But what is interesting is, I think, that you can see a kind of uneven distribution of these buildings within Slovakia. There are some castle and chateau terroirs, for instance, along the river Vach and between Košice and Prešov in this axis, and in the Gemer, historical Gemer region, in the middle of the Slovak-Hungarian borderland. And I made the statistics about the today utilization about these more than 400 buildings, which could provide me with a very particular number, that the one third of these buildings are ruinated and devastated, depopulated, even these days. Most of them, the vast majority of them, was or started to be devastated after the Second World War. Even if they had some kind of function during the communism and socialism, these functions doesn't mean that they could maintain a kind of quality of the buildings. So it was a great challenge after the fall of communism how to use and renovate these buildings. As the numbers can show, 1/3 of these buildings couldn't find their function within contemporary societies and communities. It is the map on the left is about the uneven distribution of the ruined, depopulated chateau in Slovakia. You can see that meanwhile around the Bratislava and on the west, most of these chateau already could find some kind of function, owner and clear function. In the middle of Slovakia, half of them, not the third of them, but there in Gemer, Novohrad and other regions, Zvolen, half of these chateaux are depopulated, and pose a kind of challenge for the local communities how to use them. The map on the right with the green shades shows the number of those castles, and the proportion of those castles which already are under private hands. It means that they are used as dwelling, some kind of luxurious or elegant dwelling for some enriched entrepreneurs and others who bought these estates and they renovated it, or castle hotels. It's the other function, or restaurants, sometimes wedding places. What I try to do in my research when speaking about this landscape expectation is to collect the website the descriptions about these castles of written by the local municipalities, these local leaflets, the local billboards which they erect in the village, or I try to analyze these local newspapers, how they write about these chateaux. And the whole conference is very interesting for me, saying frankly, because my evaluating committee, because it's a EU-funded fellowship, told me that it's okay that I submerge into this countryside of the Slovakia, but I should make more stronger international comparison. And saying frankly, it has a real weight. It could be important in this research because, as far as I see, the picture is quite different from this Polish-Lithuanian picture, despite the fact that you could expect that it could be some similarity because it could be ethnicized, because typically Hungarian and non-Slovak chateau owners and the dwellers lived there among Slovaks. But saying frankly, we could rather see a kind of effort of what I call cultural bridge making through the chateau residents. So the stories which they like, the local mindscape, this local storytelling and narratives likes to stress is for instance, the entrepreneurial activities of these people. Let me just cite one of these. Texts, how they had these local texts write about these, write about the past, about the bygone feudal gentry. The history of Hucín is closely connected with the fate and the life of noble families of landowners here. During the several centuries of the village's existence, 3 landowner families had a great influence on the development of the village. It doesn't mean a very positive text, but it's rather far from negative. And this kind of framing that these people brought some kind of development and entrepreneur activities into our region is very typical and repetitive in these texts. The other is, which became very popular in this local storytelling, is stressing how these people who lived among them or around them or beside them could see the whole world. They traveled a lot, or they hosted great hiring people there. If there is some kind of even just a legend or myth or unconfirmed story that Maria Theresa or others visited these people and this village and this chateau, there are in many cases some kind of yearly commemoration and in customs and so on, that the Teresianske Slavnosti and others in small villages. So they like to resonate on this in this part, a fragment of the past. And the third is this kind of tabloidization, murders, suicides, and so on, and a great many huge amount of stories about the tiny Hodby, the catacombs, which were reported to tie the castles with other churches and neighboring villages underground. And the second, which is interesting, beside these particular fragments, very frequently recurring fragments in these local storytelling, is this emotionality. That in many cases, we can find such sentences that they were not bad people, they were good people, they at least give us some work and so on, and jobs we didn't stare it. And at the end, it's interesting because many of these local recollections speaks about the whole sphere of this landed gentry and chateau dwellers, as I like to call them, as some strange or not so positive for the Slovaks. But our gentry, our landowner and this chateau dweller was a good person. And at the end, we cannot find where the bad chateau owner lived. So people like to recollect these good-heartedness within these local stories. For instance, just to cite one of them, why the relationship with the counts was elsewhere cold and sometimes even hostile, the relations of habitants of Dolná Krupa towards the Hoteks, the local family, was very respectful and grateful, and from the side of Hoteks was of paternal benevolence. And it's also very repetitive in these local stories. And at the end, the picture is, as far as I see, much more positive or not so hostile than maybe here in Poland and Lithuania remained. Beside these mappings, statistics, I try to make some fieldwork focusing on some special story. For instance, this case of Halič is interesting enough because it was a totally ruined castle, Zamok, in a village of Halič, which is not other Halič is a small village in Novohrad. And it was transformed into a luxurious hotel, a 4-star hotel. And why is it interesting? Because it can elucidate how the process of renovation can trigger the local mindscape to explore these past of their own. And they started to build up the chateau and the chateau hotel as the most important part of the past. Here I just wanted to show some quotations that even after the Second World War, and during the communism, it was written and it was issued in local newspapers that local people were not happy that the social healthcare institute was established there because they wanted to show the beautiful interior and this glorious reminiscence of the past to the broad audience. They wanted to establish there a museum or something like that, or some touristic attraction or accommodation for tourists. So even during the communism, when the whole topic was a bit tabooed and as other 5 minutes, or as other presenters already told, it's for instance a similarity between Poland and Slovakia, as far as I see, that during the Marxism there was a kind of strong focus only on the art history, and they didn't speak about the as you called the personalization of this local heritage. People even during these decades wanted to fill it with life and these local stories. And after these renovation processes, this kind of demand, this kind of expectation in the local people just became stronger and stronger. And maybe it could be a kind of source why local mindscape in Slovakia would like to be proud of these people, because if they alienate the chateau owners from them, they will alienate the buildings too, and they would like to already appropriate it into the landscape and already find the common points. I had the opportunity here. You can see the luxurious hotel. I made a local survey among the villagers. I think that already all the dogs barked me in the village because I throw a small letter, a survey for all the households in 3 and 4 villages in Slovakia, among others in Halič. And for instance, the answers was very clear that people are proud of the new owners because of this development of the contemporary landscape, but they are proud of the earlier owner too. So these surveys show in other villages also that yes, they think that they represent some kind of social inequality, but not so strong, to tell the truth, in the answers, that they don't resonate them as a kind of representatives of social inequality. But these heritage sites are something which people are proud of, and they are proud of the late owners too. And so we can find a very weak and faint trace of ethnicization of these stories. They don't speak about Hungarian landowners, for instance, but some kind of local strangers or something like that. That's why I call it as kind of cultural bridge making, that, yes, they were not Slovaks, but not Hungarians like Lajos Kossuth and others. They lived around us. Yeah, they had strange, I don't know, customs and so on. And with this, creating this sphere, this locality can have a kind of channel towards the globality. Many small examples could be shown, but I don't want to run out of time. For instance, in the schools, I went to the school of Halič, where you can find the paintings of the renovated chateau, not once, but several times. The children wrote a small verse about the village. The first verses, the first section of the poem is that here we live under a castle. It's our great proudness. Once in all times, counts lived among us. Or, for instance, this Dadov is very interesting, small anthropological point. Maybe I will close with it my presentation, if it's okay, in time. That it is a memorial plaque about the kindergarten, of the local kindergarten. And but it's not listed anywhere among the list of memorial plaques. I didn't know what is it on the pavement. Just I showed that it's a chateau, it's something related to this chateau. And this Dadov is interesting because it's a Hungarian-like word in the Slovak dialect, just in this Novohrad region. It is from the Hungarian word Dedovo, means kindergarten. And the chateau is there, locals told me, that because the Count of Forgách, the Forgách family, the Count, supported the establishment of this kindergarten. It was a very typical thing that the local, typically the ladies, the countesses, supported such caritative projects and initiatives in the time of the Hungarian kingdom. Even the descendants, it's very typical also that the descendants of these families are invited to the yarmoks, to the village festivals. And for instance, this Forgách family from Brasilia visited there, and they were also triggered by this landscape, the luxurious hotel, and they wrote their memoirs, including these reminiscence about the village, how they have a memory about it. And in other place, in Ostraluka, the Ostroluckis from Budapest was invited. Very stereotypical position was how they arrived from Budapest. They were more elegant in customs like locals. And I gave a painting as a kind of gift to the village and the new owner of the castle, because they thought that they have never thought that this ruined castle of their old ancestors would be once renovated, and it's already renovated, and they were so happy that something they would like to be somehow present in the castle. It was their phrase. So they give back the old painting of the Ostroluckis who lived there, and there was a great positive reaction from the villagers. And it's very interesting that many of these local furniture pieces are searched and sought among the villages, because most of these castles were robbed out, plundered after the Second World War. And it's a kind of local shame in most of these stories that, oh, it's a shame of us that we robbed out, that somebody robbed out, not me, not Ma, but others. And there are some calls that we should give back, or the new owners say that I could buy back furniture, but just embarrassing silence is typically the answer. But there are some very rare examples that somebody gave back something or offer something to sell again to the castle. So the story is, I think, very colorful, and as far as I see, there is a kind of difference from the Polish situation, so maybe the kind of regional comparison has reason in the future too. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. There are immediate comments in my mind about your case because I'm doing the research on Eastern Galicia and we have now the Polish landlords and Ukrainian peasants, but I will keep it for later because we have now a commentator that spent a time preparing his comments. So I'd like to introduce Simon Donig, who is with us online, and Simon holds a doctorate in history from Passau University. He has worked extensively on the history of nobilities from the late 18th to the end of 20th century, while his regional focus is chiefly on Silesia as a shared and contested Polish, German, and Czech territory. He applies a strong comparative focus in his research, and his monograph, Nobility Without Territory, Territory Without Nobility, Life World, Memory and Material Culture of the Silesian Nobility After 1945, published in German in 2019, is a history of both the memory to antebellum Silesia among multiple generations of families from the Silesian nobility and of the afterlife of the remaining noble material culture, as well as the memory associated with it in the communist post-war society. Also a long-time digital historian and digital humanist, he is currently head of the Department of the Digital Research and Information Infrastructure at the Herder Institute for Historical Research on East Central Europe, Institute of the Leibniz Association. Simon, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Anna. Thank you also so much for having me here. I'd like to express my gratitude to you and all the conveners for making it possible to join the conference online. I would have loved to be in Warsaw in person. Anyway, even virtually, it's a great privilege to be here. I would also like to extend my thanks to the three presenters for their truly intriguing and stimulating papers. The organizers have really arranged this panel well. I'd like to start by observing the overlaps of the papers and why, in my opinion, they matter. All the three papers deal with manor houses or castles as a physical remnant of noble material culture in a world of transformation. They illustrate quite well how the built environment, by its very enduring presence, has the potential to become disruptive to dominant narratives or can be an answer point for less official counter-narratives. While all of the three papers concentrate on Czechia and Slovakia, I think many of us researching similar topics, and you just commented on that, Anna, can easily relate to these observations from their own regions. All the papers, in a varying extent, start with noble, and we could discuss whether this is only true for noble groups. They start with the way family memory is written into the built environment, by architecture, by furnishing, by collecting and exposing. Filip in his paper provides a thoughtful account of such processes of memory building, and he differentiates the variation of these mnemonic technologies applied by the proprietors. I was immediately struck with the question, if narratives such as the greatness of the family, a community of values constituted by chivalry, are written into these rooms, who reads them? Are they only for direct family members, a reassurance of their social role, the wider community of nobles, or of noble families, or an entirely different public? And at which point does this kind of world building shift from the family in a probably pre-national setting and becomes increasingly nationalized? Is this the point where private collecting switches to becoming public museums in your examples? Second, is the historicist turn and the social practice of collecting and presenting the attachment of family in territory just an anti-modern reflex? Is this a retreat? Or could they rather see themselves as a sort of a new avant-garde? Luděk concentrates on Hluboká Castle, tracing the changing uses through time. That way, he allows us to explore even further the relation between family and nation. He traces early tourism in Hluboká for the 1880s. I found that particularly interesting, as I could immediately compare it to the Kotlina Jelenogorská, the Hirschberger Tal I'm more accustomed with. To you would go the question how the opening of the castle for visitors affected perceptions. István Kollai speaks of in-group and out-group perceptions in his paper. In how far did the musealization of castles like Hluboká contribute to their physical survival because they were emotionally appropriated by their visitors? What role did population and staff continuity of the organization play in this? For Upper Silesia, I noticed that houses that either had museums in them or were attached with institutions like the church seemed to have had better chances to survive the tumultuous transition society at the end of the Nazi era and the beginning of the Soviet occupation. Lastly, I'd like to ask, in how far memory is dependent on generations, and if there is a generational change of memory associated with these castles. István Kollai, in turn, pleases us with a very similar microhistory of locations, as particularly Lieux de Memoire. I found that questionnaire results you showed us truly enlightening. Also, your characterization of the landed elites as strangers belonging to us seems to me very much something worth discussing, because I can immediately relate the approach some of my Upper Silesians are taking when they speak of the castles there and the former proprietors. So I think it's really worth discussing, as is your suggestion of a landscape expectation embedded in people's minds. This seems to reflect these attitudes I've observed myself, especially nowadays, where there live many people who do not have their own roots in Silesia. And the third thing that I really noticed and that I think is worth discussing is this mechanism of shared memory making that you are addressing. Sorry, I'm rather commenting than posing questions here. But I think these are really traits, so to speak, of your presentation that are worth pointing out. However, I also have questions to you. I'd like to ask you what actually the relation between place, persons remembered, and memory is, and what role did the nationalization of the narrative play in constructing a positive attitude towards these architectonical remnants? In other words, did it matter for the history of Adela Stur to be associated with this specific location? And lastly, could you comment on the selectiveness of memory? Who is remembered and for what? But as you said yesterday, I think it was yesterday, Anna, good panels deserve good questions, and not me blocking the audience from asking them. So I would hence hand back to you as the chair.
Thank you so much. Actually, you asked already a few questions that I prepared as the kind of reserve questions, so I'm left without a few of them. But these were good questions, and now it's your time for answers. Thank you so much for these comments and questions. Comments are as much welcome as questions, I think.
Okay, so if I may start, and thank you very much for your comments and questions. So the first question, if I understood it correctly, was about who the public was. If we are talking about the castles, so I would say that all the examples I mentioned, and even also the ones I didn't mention when we are talking about the castles from the 19th century, have a lot of in common, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the 19th century, because of course, when I was talking about representative country residences, it means that they should represent like their owners. And now the question is, as you ask, who is the public? So in every case, it's the rest of the noble society, or the first society. I would say it can be kind of a manifestation to the entire world. Of course, but I would say we have to take into account also the personality of the builder, because I can give you maybe an example of Vincent of Auersperg, who I was talking about, who was doing the drawings for Žleby Castle himself, together with the members of his family, his mother, his wife, and the result was that if we compare, for example, Hluboká with Žleby Castle, then we can find Hluboká like more representative than Žleby, because it was kind of how to say it, like a fairy tale castle where the fantasy of the owners was the main or more important stuff than representation, I would say. So if I was talking about a monument to chivalry, then it means that the reason why Žleby could be called or could be referred to as a monument to chivalry is that Vincent himself was interested in chivalry so much that he decided to conceive his project in this way. Yeah, so I would say he himself, as the building owner, was the main person, as how to say it, like maybe more important than like the entire publicum. But when we were talking about the collections or about the castle museums, so then it depends actually, because I would say in the early 19th century, the tendency was that the owners wanted the public to learn more about the history that somehow concerned themselves. But at the end of the 19th century, I would say they were somehow, if I call it like more enlightened, then it doesn't sound very well, but their role was somehow in the background. Yeah, so of course, foundation of a museum is always a part of a cultural capital, but still they wanted to the visitors of their collections, of their castles, to learn more about history in general, about arts, but not so much about themselves. So if I understood this question. And I'm sorry, regarding the second question, can you maybe repeat? Because I wrote down it should concern if the castles were considered as something that was avant-garde or.
No, I was referring to the style. Sorry, that probably came a little bit rapidly across. I was wondering, you were addressing the way in which literature usually considers that kind of neo-Gothic style, which is that this is essentially a practice that is turned backward. So it's a remembering, let's say, of a dying breed of aristocracy, of the days when they were great and grand and when they still had power and influence. And I was wondering, if you look, for instance, into Victorian England, then the neo-Gothic is by no means a backwards-oriented cultural movement. It's rather something that considers itself progressive. So as compared to the previous Regency cultural production, for instance, people speak of, we can hardly imagine that if we see all that sugar-coated detail nowadays, but they consider themselves to be more authentic, to be more original, more future-directed. They were using valuable, massive materials like solid wood and not only veneering and stuff like that. And I was wondering if seen from that perspective, this could be really only considered as a sort of a backward-looking movement, or rather as a sort of a cultural avant-garde that looks to something new. They don't know what's coming for them, but they in that particular situation, they might consider themselves as being a sort of an avant-garde.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, you are fully right. If we look at Great Britain, then the whole movement was considered as progressive. There were, of course, some exceptions, but I would refer to the whole movement as progressive. The problem is how these castles in Central Europe, or maybe only in the Czech Republic, maybe in Slovakia as well, but also in Austria, were viewed because I would say the reason why these castles were viewed like something that should remind the building owners to the period of their greatest glory was that they, like the researchers, wanted to find or to come with a thesis, but didn't deal with written sources that are, as Professor Švaříčková-Slabáková was explaining today, are stored in archives, and that makes it make it possible to find out more about the intentions, about the personality of the owners. Yeah, but as also Luděk mentioned, if you look, for example, at Hluboká castle, this must have been very comfortable castle at that time. And if we look at other activities of the aristocrats building their castles in the 19th century, they all were businessmen, so they were dealing with business. They were dealing with factories and so on, with agriculture and so on. So they didn't want to live only in the past, but they focused, of course, on the future more than the past, I would say, because like living in the past or focusing on past only would not could be a good strategy in regards of open bleiben, as we also discussed today. So I would say why they decided to build such castles like in romantic styles, New Gothic, and so on, is that like the main reason, it was something very popular. It was it was connected with Great Britain, and as I said, everything that was connected with Great Britain was considered fashionable. Yeah, so it was also a part of cultural capital, and then this is the main reason. And of course, in some cases, there was also some kind of sentimentality in case of Vincent of Auersperg, for example, in case of
Filip.
Yes, sorry. So if it's enough as the answer to your question, so
Yeah, then we can proceed.
Thank you for your questions. I will start with the first one about opening. If the opening of the castle affected the perception of the family Schwarzenberg family, I would say that the opening of the castle already in the 1870s, and then especially after the First World War, is a part of strategy of the family, how to react on losing power as aristocracy in general in the Habsburg monarchy. They are, since 1848, they are funding and initiating projects like books on the history of their family, projects that are describing the cultural heritage in southern Bohemia, and part of this is also making public accessible the family archives in South Bohemia, and also some of these castles. So I would say that there is definitely an interest on the side of the family to show the collections, show the interiors, and maybe also to lower some tenses and pressure between the social classes too. On one hand, of course, the ordinary visitors, of course, were confronted with the wealth of the family, but on the other hand, at least the nobility was not isolated from the rest of the population. They tried to show some guest and show it also to the general public. That's also connected with the other question, about the physical survivor of the castle, and if it depended on opening it to the public. I would definitely say that it was an important factor in this matter, because as I tried to describe, Hluboká became already in the interwar period, or maybe even before, a phenomenon of tourism and of the South Bohemia as a region. If someone went as a tourist to this region, Hluboká was definitely on the to-do list and was visited. And the people knew that what to expect from that castle, because already in the late 19th and early 20th century, there were pictures of the interiors published in books and newspapers. And that's why I think that also the totalitarian regimes didn't want to change the interior very much, in case not to disappoint the visitors, because it at some point it was not the castle was perceived not only as a aristocratic residence, but also as some kind of regional monument and case of national heritage, so to say, in the language of the post-war period. The staff continuity also definitely played an important role, as they were really loyal to the aristocratic owners, even in the times of Nazi occupation and under the communist regime, at least at the very beginning in the 40s and 50s. And they also managed to preserve the castle and almost the whole collection, even in the complicated days in May 1945, as the Red Army came and built up a camp in front of the castle in the park. There were almost no damages on the collections. Only several dozens of wine bottles were taken by the Soviet army and Soviet secret police. But otherwise, the collection and the interiors of the castle were preserved and shown actually from starting on 16th of May 1945, 8 days after the liberation. They already started with the tourist service and showing the castle to the public and to some delegations of army officials and state officials. And dependence of memory on generations, there is definitely a significant seizure with the year 1918, with the end of the and dissolution of the Habsburg Empire. The generation which built up Hluboká to its appearance, neo-Gothic appearance, and their children were the old nobility, so to say, and then actually with the First World War there is a generational change because the old Prince Adolf Josef Schwarzenberg died and his son came, and he was confronted with the land reform and loss of a big part of their properties and estates, and the reaction was a reduction of their public role and maintaining only in the inner family circle or among other noble people, and not demonstrating their wealth and influence as intensively as in the time before the First World War, which means that, for example, there was a fire in Hluboká in 1921, which damaged one part of the roof, and there were even the first and his wife was even discussing with their kids if it makes sense to repair it because it would cost too much, and or if they should simply let it be like it was and not invest any more money to this old-fashioned residence. So there was definitely a different approach of the younger generations of the family to this aristocratic memory in the interwar period.
So, István, I need to ask you to be brief, but you will be the first one to ask the questions to answer the questions from the audience. So, go on.
Yeah, okay. So, thank you for the questions. Please correct me if I didn't understand your question proper. But your second question was who is remembered, as far as I understood. Who is remembered?
Yes, who's remembered and who not?
Yes, and who is not? Yes, it is formulated in the intersection and the interrelatedness of local agents, how to say, academics, artistic works, and national memory policy. But this latter factor is not so strong in the case of Slovakia, because the national memory policy, this policy of remembrance, doesn't have such a strong view what to do and how to embed the stories of chateau owners and manor house owners in the grand narrative of Slovakeness and Slovaks. Slovak textbooks, for instance, didn't criticize this sphere, and there isn't a kind of scapegoating or something. It was in the interwar period, but already not. And there is a kind of contradiction between the textbooks of Slovakia. If you read them, you don't find anything so strong message, a narrative about this sphere and about these places. And meanwhile, you open other books of for instance, touristic leaflets and so on. It's full of the pictures, which is omitted from the textbooks. So there is a contradiction, but it's not solved by the national memory policy, and there isn't kind of strong, how to say, interest and intention to fight against these fragments of memory, which started to build a bit from below around these manor houses and so on. But because of this lack of a strong policy of remembrance, the process is relatively colorful, And we can find some tendencies how these people are and stories are selected. For instance, these artistic volumes are decisive. So for instance, about Ostra Luka, which I mentioned in my presentation, a book writer who wanted to write books for the children and for the younger generations wrote a book about the love story of Ludovic Stur, the leader of the Slovak national movement, and the daughter of this family from the chateau. It became an enormously big success in Slovakia, and it's totally changed the position of this small castle. It became a subject of interest within the village too, logically. A new enriched entrepreneur came from Bratislava and bought it and renovated it and so on. Meanwhile, historians try to also figure out what is true and what is not in this story. It's very clear that within the village there wasn't any kind of legend and myth and anecdotes about this love story, and even about the Ostrolutskis it was not so strong. But after the book, suddenly old anecdotes came out, which means that we have to be very careful of these memories. And in other cases, academic volumes can have a kind of effect on this local selection process. Or, as I told you, this tabloidization is also strong. For instance, in Vyšný Kubín, Árpád Kubínyi made a suicide after the First World War, and it became the part of this local memory. Already the local office of the municipality, the Obecný úrad, the municipality office functions and in this building, in this castle building. And if there is a kind of problem, technical problem in the building, there is a kind of, how to say, this humorous reaction that the ghost of Árpád Kubínyi is somewhere here and so on. And the whole castle is called as Árpádovské castle. Just because of a suicide, he became something to be remembered. So it's a colorful process, and just some kind of tendencies can be found. And I don't know whether I understand your first question or the first part of your question, that how the places are linked to the memories. So these memories came from places or just from or independent from them.
Yes, partially. The thing is, Anna, I would not want to block questions from the audience with my questions. Maybe I should retract that question, and we should have another or two questions from the audience, so that this is not single-sided.
Yeah, I think it would be great. I think that Konrad will allow us to steal 5 minutes from the closing remarks, which won't take 15 minutes, we promise. And with that, we can take questions from the audience. If there are any. There should be some.
As far as I see, there is no question from the audience.
Okay, can I ask my last question of this conference?
Okay,
and that would be to István, because as I mentioned, your research overlaps with my research interests. I will use this last opportunity to ask you the question. I wanted to ask about this fascinating category of being in between Slovaks and Hungarians. So they are not foreigners, the landowners. They were not foreigners, but they were not Slovaks either. So was it specific for this particular village you conducted the field work in, or was it broader kind of something you could observe? No. Because it's totally different in Eastern Galicia. I mean, the Polish landlords are remembered as Poles, strangers, foreigners, and as the class strangers, meaning the landlords. So they are absolutely foreign.
Yes, I see that there are differences, because it's not just a local phenomenon, but you can find it in other cases too. For instance, it's very rare that a chateau owner is entitled or attributed as a Hungarian. It's strictly in Britain. If you ask the locals, were they Hungarian? Yeah, they spoke Hungarian, but they can speak Slovak or something like that. It's important that in the Slovak there is a phrase, this uhorski, which means that not ethnic Hungarian, but of Hungarian citizen or something like that. It can also ease this kind of terminological question. And the other is that as I listen to these presentations these days, I saw that many of these tensions and so on are related with the land reform. And maybe it was my intention or conclusion in my mind during these days that maybe the Czechoslovak authorities made a kind of help to this Slovak-Hungarian relation to conduct this land reform right after the establishment of Czechoslovakia without opening a debate about it. And as a result, during the interwar period, these chateau dwellers and landowners became not so important. They became a primus inter pares in the village. And they became politically passive. For instance, it was a problem for the Hungarians living in the south. They criticized this Hungarian originated gentry that they are passive politically. They were not so active in politics, with the exception of some people. And maybe it's my impression that maybe it made this memory smooth, because these last decades were relatively, how to say, passive, without any kind of strict tensions. And as you also mentioned, many of them based on their wealth already in industrialist enterprises and so on. They lived in a chateau. Maybe they seized this title of nobility, but they grandparents from Prussia, from Czech Republic, from Czechia, sorry, from Austrian lands and so on. And many of them, for instance, the case of Ostraluka, they really could speak Slovak. I don't know what was the situation in this Polish-Lithuanian and Polish.
In case of Eastern Asia, the same. Usually they speak.
They bilingual. So, yes, it's not just a local phenomenon that they position these people in in-between category. Sometimes I call it as a memory game, because with this process they make a distance between these people and the Hungarian ethnicity stronger than it was. For instance, in the case of Halics, this Forgács family was a very active diplomat and of the Horthy regime, and they was a very close. They belonged to the closest circle of Horthy. But locals remember rather just they moved there and established the kindergarten and so on, and this part of this past is not so strongly resonated today. It can be judged as a positive thing, because this under-ethnicization means that this kind of ethnic tensions are not reproduced, but meanwhile it's a kind of appropriation of these stories. So they are only just one step, so two steps far from being Slovak, which is not true, I have to say.
Thank you so much for this explanation, a fascinating story for me. And I think that because me moderating this session was also a very late addition to the program, I didn't prepare any formal concluding remarks. These are going to be presented by Konrad in a minute, but I just want to use this opportunity to say that I'm glad we managed to gather scholars from such diverse countries and with such diverse background, and I hope that you learned as much as I did, and I hope that you discovered some kind of new research field for connected or corresponding with your own research field, because that would be that would prove this conference to be a successful event for me. So thank you so much for this last session, and the mic is now to Konrad.
So, as we have reached, happily, the end of the 14th Genealogies of Memory conference as a coordinator of this project, I would like to say a few words, especially I would like to mention all the people who were not mentioned, who haven't been mentioned before, who are responsible for the organization of this conference. So, first of all, I would like to thank all the guests, our guests, all the academic council members, speakers, participants, and listeners on site as well online. Thank you very much to be here with us. Thanks to all of my colleagues from European Network Remembrance and Solidarity who worked with us during this project, especially Agnieszka Osiak, Magdalena Ważny, Helena Link, Urszula Bijoś, Agnieszka Kucharska, Joanna Orłoś, profesor Ewelina Szpak, dr Małgorzata Pakier, Magdalena Żelazowska, dr Olga Lebediewa, Gabriela Rolf, dr Gabor Dani, dr Bartosz Dziewanowski-Stewańczyk, and finally dr Wojciech Pazik. I also want to thank to our external partners, Jan Prosiński, Evenstream, which is our technical support, and Olimpiada Catering. But above all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude and appreciation for my team, who is not here because they're still working outside and prepare our stuff to be removed from this place. And I mean Karolina Kruźlak, Anna Michalska, Dr. Monika Haber, and Dr. Agnieszka Nowakowska. And work of these people was vital to the successful launch and finalization of this project. So, wish you all good luck in the future. Those of you who are leaving Warsaw, safe trip back home. Those who is joining us tomorrow during the guided tour, I wish you nice trip, and this is the time to say goodbye. One last announcement. I just want to remind you that the meeting point for the guided tour is at Marszałkowska Street, next to Pasażer Wiecha Uniqlo store. Those of you who are staying at Gromada Hotel, you will be collected tomorrow at 8:45 by my colleague Anna Michalska. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Konrad, for making it happening.
You're welcome. Thank you all.